Well, hello, friends, and welcome to the very first solo episode. This is a brand new challenge for me, but I really wanted to do it for the following three reasons. Number one, I get a lot of questions about my story and how I started, and over time, I started to realize that I am perhaps my best case study and the best example of what happens when, after years of dedicated work, I started to get into a different place, a place of much more comfort, a place of ease. And eventually, all of these steps that came along the way led to where I am today in building my business. There's a lot of parallels to be drawn. So I thought I'd start from the very beginning. I also always felt that there's so many questions that I never get asked, and it was quite convenient in the previous episodes to hide behind the stories of my guests and make sure that we focus on what they think, on their opinions, and my viewpoint and my story always remained hidden, at least on this show. So without further ado, I thought I'd start right from the beginning. And the beginning I call, and this is very similar to the processes that you will see and the five steps that you will see when it comes to building your own business. And the first one is always the awakening. And I find that whenever I start working with clients, this is the step that always comes first. So, what I mean by awakening, and in my case, this was something that happened probably about 5 years ago during COVID. And I think many of us felt at that point in time that this really shifted their perspective. And for me, that happened to be the first time when I was on my own, not rushing, not having all the noise and distraction. And something at that point suggested to me that I needed to look a little bit deeper. And I think at the time, a lot of us went through a lot of change, but for me, that was expressed in me getting to know myself a bit more intimately, in me getting to know what it's like to be on my own and being forced to be on my own in isolation. I started to see things that I never knew before, including a different side of me. Because you see, I was raised and I always believed that I was the kind of person that's a people person, the one that's always out there around people, the one that needs people, is very extroverted. And often I would get tired and I couldn't quite understand why. And that period, that gap, gave me the understanding that I also have a different side to me, one that really needs to slow down and one that really enjoys the clarity that comes with that. And what happened afterwards was that I started to really search for meaning. I connected back with my spirituality, and that led me on to a journey on many retreats, many classes, many wellness um, coachings and teachings, and whatever it may be. And I think at the time that was probably a period of 3 years, I want to say, of back and forth, of me trying to find some meaning and looking for some kind of purpose. I loved the job that I was doing, as I know many of you do, but there was something missing. And that's when I started to search and dig deeper. Where is that purpose? Where is that feeling? I'm in the middle of my career. What is going on? But the answer wouldn't come. So I spent a few years going, traveling, exploring yoga, exploring meditation, and generally finding a bit more space for me. But the answer still wasn't there. And that's when phase two came. And again, I would like to compare this to the second stage whenever you are coming up with an idea. And that's usually the origination or the time when you actually allow yourself to think that you could be something different and that you could be doing something different. And for me, I was looking that I had a good mentor who encouraged me to follow something that had been on the back of my mind. Because you see, during COVID, I started to listen to a lot of podcasts, and I was wondering why I really enjoyed listening to a few in particular. And I would listen religiously. I didn't know it at the time, but I was, in a way, mimicking and embracing and really learning from the people that I was listening to, enjoying their style, the way they talked about things, the way they had guests. And I was dreaming and wishing that I could do that myself until the point when I decided, that's it, I'm going to do it. And I already had the theme because I knew that that was going to be something that I had struggled with my own life. And there were many other women around me that I was seeing at events, at conferences, at, in the industry here in London. And they were all looking for purpose. They were all looking for meaning. They were all in their mid careers and they didn't really know what was next. There was something that had to change. And that's when I said, okay, well, my job then will be to start recording those stories, to start exploring them. And my legacy perhaps will be me leaving those stories behind. And hopefully, even if one person listens to those stories and gets inspired, well, that's my job done. But little did I know that that was actually not the end of the story, and that was not at all the end of the project. It was only the beginning. And I never expected just how enthusiastically this would be received. I never thought that there would be so many women out there who want to come forward and share their stories. And the best thing that I learned from all of them was that there wasn't one size fit all. There were so many ways in which we could completely reinvent our careers. And sometimes it was something to do with starting a completely new role. Sometimes they created new roles for themselves in the same organizations. And sometimes it was just a question of keeping two jobs at the same time, having a hobby, doing something for the community. And that's how the conversation started to get deeper. And I realized that there were two types of people that I was really interested in. Number one, I was constantly inviting coaches. I was fascinated to speak with them, to learn new techniques, to just get their experience. How did they come about? How did they find out their gift? How did they know that's the thing they wanted to do? And stay with me here because that leads us to the next little trace and breadcrumb in the story. And the other type of people that I was inviting on the show, well, that was anybody to do with the wellness industry, any discipline, any specialist that was out there saying, look, we need to slow down, we need to listen to our bodies more. The way we've been taught to heal and the way we've been taught to go and see the doctor, there's something missing in there. And everybody who was talking and connecting on that narrative around we need to take responsibility for our health, for our lives, for our wellness. That was the kind of people that I wanted to have on the show. So I'm sharing this because this was really the kind of transitional stage two of the show and of my life and my story. Even that's when I realized that it was about something deeper here. It wasn't just about the people that were coming on the show. It wasn't just about the stories. It was about me. I was one of the case studies. I was the one who was also looking for my purpose and my meaning. And the show and the podcast was an element, but there was more. But what it did was that it helped me to release my voice, to get in front of the mic for the first time, in front of the camera, even if it was a Zoom camera at the time, and just to experiment, just to have fun, to start promoting, to start sharing what I'm doing, and to not be shy in doing that. In a way, when I said allowing, that was me allowing to express my voice. And you can see how over time we start to collapse these timelines because the first period was about maybe 3 years of me kind of thinking that there's something out there, but not really knowing. And then, within the period of a year, I actually had narrowed it down and I was like, aha, I now have my topic. I know that this is also about me, but what do we do next? And that's around the time when I met with my first mentor, um, who introduced me to the principles of business and energetics and how energy is so important in our lives. And that's when something really clicked. And that's when the deep inner work began, and that's usually the third phase, and I always notice this with my clients as well, and that's usually when they come to see me. This is the stage where we're ready to do the work. We've done the initial soul searching, we have an idea, but we just don't know where to start or how to connect the dots. It's still a little bit vague. So this is where things continue to narrow down, and the next period didn't take a year. It was probably about, I'd say, half a year, maybe 6 months. So you see how continuously we go on and collapse the timeline, so to speak. So that period was one that I would like to describe as remembering. I think we like to fantasize a lot, and we always think that there's some kind of big discovery that's waiting for us. We always like to think of the process of um, epiphanies, if you will, or big realizations that come when we find something. And so we set out to go on a search, but it's in fact quite the opposite. It's removing all the barriers, removing all the noise, removing everything that is distracting us and getting back to the core. So it's not a journey of discovery, it's a journey of going back to ourselves. And that's really important for the story. So what happened in those 6 months is that number one, I had to let go of quite a few things. There were projects that I had to remove, there were beliefs that I had to work on, there were people even in my life that I had to say goodbye to, and new people that I had to welcome. But I knew that I was on the right track and I was being supported because the right people started to show up in my life. That will be people who were mentors, that will be people who were guests on the show, that will be role models, and that will be me volunteering as well, joining some powerful containers, just being surrounded, really changing my environment, changing the people that I see on a day-to-day basis as much as possible. And I get it. Sometimes we don't have that luxury, and or at least we make ourselves believe that we don't. And of course, there are people that can't be replaced that easily, but we can genuinely try and reevaluate some of the relationships that we have. What is that giving me? What is this project, this work, this relationship, whether it's a work or a personal relationship? Is it still giving me what it did at the beginning? Is it still needed in my life? So there was a lot of cleaning. And a lot of that had to happen because I was making space. And while I didn't know it at the time, I knew that I was making space for something bigger. So to connect the dots, I already had the podcast and I thought, well, that's part of it, but there's something else to it. And people started to invite me to partner with them in coaching, which I enthusiastically took on because it felt like the invitation that I had always waited for. And then people invited me to partner and organize events with them, events along the lines of what I've always been fascinated by, events that connect us back, right back to the soul, right back to our roots, right back to what the essence of things is, so to speak. So this was not about just doing another yoga class or going to the gym. This was really events, circles, gatherings where we're there to unpack. We're there to do the work. And later in my life, I realized that we call this somatics. So that became the missing piece for me. And I realized I wasn't really into wellness. I was definitely into coaching, but what my angle was somatics as well. These two opposing, I suppose, forces that I had with me. On the one hand, the very outgoing, extroverted, really fiery one, the one that gets business done, the ones that's happy to talk about sales, the one that loves working with clients, the one that's always happy to be in front of the camera and be center stage. And then there was the other part of me, which was the much quieter one, the one that needed time off to recalibrate, to recharge, the one that was starting to realize that nothing could happen on this mode of go, 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 and we need it, and I needed to slow down. So that's where somatics became really big in my life. I started studying somatics. I started to support and host events with other teachers who were experienced in all kinds of disciplines, be that family constellations, be it somatics, be it biohacking, or any kinds of events that help to make us feel better. Um, so those were my 2 pieces, and that's where they started to connect, but there was still a lot that wasn't clear, and I knew I had to continue to do the work, and at that point, I was wondering, and I was thinking to myself, "Why is it taking so long? Why is it that everybody else around me seems to have their vision so much more easily, or they know exactly what they're doing, or they know where they're heading?" And I think for me, and the way I see it now, is that it was quite a big download that was coming. And that's why I always like to remind everyone who's watching this or listening this, or everyone who's starting to work on their next level identity, that you don't know, but you might be getting a huge download of information. You're probably building an empire, and that doesn't happen in a day. So you have to give yourself that third and very important stage. You know, we've had the awakening, we've had the allowing of things to come to you, allowing to receive. And then now we're at the stage where we are remembering, where we're connecting to ourselves, and in a way that is a bit of a slowdown. It feels like a slowdown. It may even feel like a pause when not a lot seems to be happening, but actually so much is happening. And if you know me, you know that one of my favorite sayings is that when, sometimes we like to imagine in our heads that if nothing's happening and we're not doing anything, if we're not doing anything, it means that nothing is happening. But that's quite the opposite. So I always like to remind clients and students and everyone around me that the more we slow down, the more our energy speeds up. So this third and third part of the process is really, really important. That's the slowdown before the leap. And that's a period that could take months. For some people, it takes longer. For some people, it's an it's an instant shift. But in my case, we continued to collapse the timeline, so we were now at about 6 months of reintegrating, discovering, and what really helped me, and what was one of the other missing pieces of the puzzle was, at that point I discovered human design. And there's a lot of talk about this today. And the way I decided to took it on and to integrate it into my work was to just, instead of labeling people and putting them into boxes, to just see, okay, is there something unique? Is there something specific to that person that they should really be aware of when they go about finding their vision, finding their dream, building, finding the most optimal way to work? And that's when I said, okay, that could be helpful. Let me use myself again as a case study. And that's indeed how I started to make sense of the two opposite forces that I had in me. And I'm sharing this, and I think it's important because I'm sure there are many others out there who may be in that in-between space, who may feel that they have two ideas, two projects, two even personalities of theirs that are out there that are sometimes hard to balance or coexist. But my advice is to not rush, to allow them time to express, and to find a way to integrate them into your business so that it is a reflection of who you are. And my business will forever have the two sides, the fire, the engine, the growth, and then it would also have the slow down route. Time is luxury. Make sure that you give yourself the time. That's just who I am. And human design helped me to get to that. And I still remember this summer, it was recently, I had a very powerful conversation with one of my human design mentors and teachers. And as we were going through my profile and explaining various concepts in the process, um I started to connect the dots, and I actually played an interesting game with AI. And I said, look, if you know this profile, if you know, if you have the characteristics of this person, what would be their ideal vocation? And it was surprising that what came out finally kind of clicked, the pieces clicked, and I started to realize, oh wow, this is not just the podcast, this is not just the somatics and the events. There's so much more to it. I'm actually building a platform. I'm actually building a media company. I'm actually building a multifaceted, multi-pillared business. And that's the perfect suit, the perfect match for me. Energetically, from a human design perspective, just everything started to align. I call this next stage the alignment, and this is the fourth stage, and it's a beautiful stage. Some people compare it in your business, it could be a leap. That's when you feel that things are finally taking off. And that's certainly how I found myself, in that fourth and very pleasant stage of things finally feeling like they've aligned. There was one missing piece still, and that's why I wanted to use this opportunity to give you another tip or reminder that, um, I think it's quite hard, and people always like to think that they have to have a strategy. That if I always get the question of how do I find people, to be my mentors? How do I find people to co-create or partner with? How do I find people to work with on my team, or even guests to have on the show? And the truth is, it's the same. It's the same process. It's not a process of finding, but it's a process of stripping the noise and getting back to the core, and letting, in my case, people come to me. And as I was doing that, one of the things that really appealed to me and really called to me was an event that was happening, an arts therapy event, that was hosted in Barcelona, that I really, really enjoyed. Um, I went to that not really knowing, or thinking, what I'm going to get out of it. It just sounded like a lot of fun, and I thought it'd be a nice holiday. And little did I know, it turned out to be one of the most transformative experiences of my year and the process of building my business. And you see, this is what I mean. The things that sometimes help us the most are not the things that we set out to get and the things that we plan for. The way this unfolded for me was that at that art retreat, I reconnected with a long forgotten part of mine, which was the writing. I was a very good writer when I was young. I always enjoyed that. I was probably the best. I won all kinds of competitions when I was in school, and I really enjoy that. And when we kids, we do those things just because we love it. Nobody pays us to do that. Nobody asks us to do that. We just go with what we feel naturally called for, and then we get conditioned, and then we go through school and we forget and we learn to focus on other more important things. So, where I'm going with this story is that as I was attending that retreat, beautiful things unfolded. Number one, I connected back with my talent for writing, and I realized that that's an important part of my story of my business. And I realized that the community that I've always wanted to build, which was the final missing element, was actually going to come through writing. And that's when I realized that I've been drawn to Substack for a reason. I've been following a few favorite authors and teachers on it because I wanted to be on that as well. So you see how following your instincts, following your passions, following the little, I call them breadcrumb trails of what you find interesting and engaging takes you to that next step. So it's not from a place of thinking, oh, I need to figure it out. And trust me, I've tried. I made that mistake when I was young. Oh, I need to figure out what my next big idea is. I need to figure out how to make this work. I need to figure out who to position, how to market, blah, 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 blah. A lot of noise. But if you ever get into that stage, just trust the intuition, follow the things that you really, really enjoy, the hobbies, the interests. Just go for it. And out on the back of that event, not only did I find out the missing piece of the puzzle, the writing and the Substack, and that I was going to build the decision that I was going to build my membership, my community through there, it was just also beautiful because I connected with people who are to these day my clients, co-creators, people that I've hosted events with. I never thought this was going to come out of one single event. So it just goes to show what happens when you follow your heart. So this is the fourth stage. The fourth stage that I said was the alignment. This is when you get on. And the way I describe it is I borrowed this term from one of my teachers, a superflow timeline. And you see how we started talking in the beginning of this episode about collapsing timelines and how all these different stages were taking less and less and less time. And I get to one of my favorite paradoxes in this world, which is that we can rush things and we often like to think that we can speed things up. But actually, what we're doing is not really speeding up. It is just collapsing time. It just takes less time. And it takes less time because we're much more connected with ourselves, we're much more aligned, and things just start to fall into place. I wish I could give you one single tip that's going to get you there, but there are really no shortcuts. It's all about going and giving yourself the space and allowing for things to come to you in the most natural way. Of course, this doesn't mean to be passive. It doesn't mean to just rest on in one place, to rest on your laurels and to never try something new. It's quite the opposite. But what I'm really hoping to get across is that it doesn't come from a place of forcing, it doesn't come from a place of pushing, it doesn't come from a place of proving. So once you actually start to feel safe in your body and you start to understand this concept of knowing that there are no conditions to how you can go about achieving what you want. And you actually not just know it in a mental, um, cognitive level, but you actually start to feel it in your body, which is where somatics comes in. That's when the pieces started to align. So that's where I headed. All the pieces of my puzzle or my business were connected. I had the podcast, I had the team, I had the Substack writing business, which was my community. I had the coaching so that I could go and give and serve with what I felt was my gift. And then of course I also had the events which I love so much, which I'm hosting now with friends, with other co-creators, with other teachers, and that just gives me so much joy because for me, there's nothing better than the contact in person. So this is how the pieces started to come together. But there is a fifth and final stage that I don't want to miss, and I think it's really important. So if you are going and setting out on this journey and you've gone through some of those stages, remember there's a fifth one and it's equally important. And the same goes for your business. There's the stage of rest, it's the stage of consolidation. So I haven't quite gotten to that one yet, but I know that it's coming and I can already feel it in my bones. And this is really important because again, I think we often forget and we think that strategy is all about doing, but there's so much to be gained out of rest because with by doing more of it, you're actually creating more space. And it's not a slowdown. I think we always like to think of it as a slowdown, but rest is really the final stage, right? As I like to call it, the completeness. This is where you go and you say, okay, this cycle, this period of this is complete. I am complete. I think that's the best way to describe it is in Japanese culture, they have something called enso, which is where you take the brush, you make a single stroke, and you try to make a circle. And it doesn't have to be perfect, and usually never is. And that's the point of it. The complete the journey, it's never perfect, it's never complete, and it's not a linear process, it's a spiral. So you go through these 5 stages again and again and again, and sometimes we like to think we're going in a circle, but we're not. We're going in a spiral, which is always going upwards and upwards. So sometimes just around the corner, there's the next bit coming and the next bit coming. And I think the fifth stage is all about accepting that, completing, drawing the enso and saying, this is it. This is complete for now. I know there's a lot more coming, but this is where I want to stay now. I feel comfortable here. And again, I want to caveat this doesn't mean to stay in that one place, doesn't mean not to grow, doesn't mean to get too comfortable, but it just means that comes a time when it's good to give yourself time to consolidate, time to integrate, and to respect that. So that, in a nutshell, is the five elements, the five bits of my story. I hope that you've enjoyed that. And again, I think there's something to be said about personal health struggle as well, because I missed that in the beginning, and I think that's important as well. And I sometimes wonder if I hadn't had that, whether I would have gone on this journey. And in my case, I it took me a little while, and I didn't even know if I wanted to bring it up on this episode, but I think it's important to share because I know that there's so many of you out there that perhaps have had a similar experience. And for me, it started with being diagnosed with an underactive thyroid. And at the time, I didn't really understand what that meant. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that that was really the signal that happened at the time that really mm, made me realize that if I continue in the way I was going, the full speed ahead, something was going to give. And it really made me pause. It really made me look for answers. So I really think that it's important to share that there's always that little, it's not the reason, but it's the thing that really gives you that shift, that push to start looking. So, whatever it may be from you, whether that's just a personal realization, something changing in your life, maybe life forced you to look for a change. Sometimes these changes are not up to us. Whatever it may be, I just want to use this story and to encourage you um, to take your time. If I haven't said it enough of this episode, I really want to give that idea of finding a little bit of stillness and to start to like change, because you see the reality is we're always in a state of transition. This is how my writing blog, The Space in Between, was born, because I felt that um we're always in a change, we're always shifting, and I've seen how people get so uncomfortable with the idea of shifts, of change. So what I'm hoping to do with all this work, with this podcast, with my guests, with everything that I'm bringing to you, is to just give you a sense, a different perspective. The change is good, the change is welcome, the change is always there. It's a fact of life. And when we give ourselves the space and the time and we do the inner work first, we give ourselves the grounding. That's when we start to get the roots deep down into the ground. That's when the wings can come as well. So I hope that this was useful. I will probably do another solo episode because it sounds like I've really enjoyed this. And I have a very exciting guest coming for the next episodes. I can't reveal too much, but I really hope that you stay with me to find out who it is. And in the meantime, make sure that you follow me on social media to stay up to speed with the latest updates.